Hi guys, relax for a moment. Allow your breathing to slow. Imagine that the heat of the day has already passed. The bright desert sun has slipped below the horizon, and a gentle darkness now rests over the valley of the Nile. The air is still warm, but softer than before. Far away, water moves quietly through the river channels. Reeds sway along the banks. Small insects hum in the night. A few lamps still glow behind the walls of mud brick homes. Most people are already asleep. Tonight, we travel back into one of the longest and quietest chapters of human history. We travel into ancient Egypt. Not the Egypt of grand victories and famous rulers. Not the Egypt of dramatic stories. Instead, we enter the Egypt of ordinary days. The Egypt of bakers rising before dawn. The Egypt of farmers walking dusty paths. The Egypt of fishermen watching the river at sunrise. The Egypt of tired workers returning home beneath fading evening light. And as we move slowly through this ancient world, a gentle question follows us. Why did Egyptian society change so slowly? Generation after generation, many parts of life remained familiar. People worked similar fields. Families lived in similar homes. Craftsmen used familiar tools. Scribes copied familiar words. Years passed. Then decades. Then centuries. Yet much of daily life continued in ways that would have felt recognizable to those who came before. The answer begins here. In the darkness beside the Nile. The river was sleeping, but it was never truly still. Even at night, water continued its long journey through the land. Ancient Egyptians depended upon this river for nearly everything. Without it, the surrounding desert would have been harsh and empty. With it, life became possible. Villages clustered near its banks. Fields stretched outward from its waters. Paths connected homes, workshops, and storage buildings. Boats drifted between settlements. The Nile created a pattern. And people followed that pattern. Year after year. Generation after generation. A child born beside the river often grew into the same rhythms that had guided parents and grandparents. When the waters rose, fields were prepared. When the waters retreated, seeds were planted. When crops matured, harvest began. The cycle returned again. And again. And again. Life moved in circles more often than straight lines. Perhaps that was one reason change arrived slowly. Every year already carried its own familiar shape. Long before sunrise, movement began inside small homes built from mud bricks dried beneath the Egyptian sun. Families stirred from sleep. Simple mats were rolled aside. People sat quietly while the coolness of early morning still lingered. Outside, darkness slowly softened into gray. Roosters called. Dogs wandered dusty streets. Somewhere nearby, someone was already grinding grain. The sound of stone against stone drifted through the air. Many mornings began this way. Not just for one family. Not just for one village. But for countless households spread along the river valley. Bread would need to be baked. Water would need to be carried. Animals would need attention. Fields would need work. The tasks waiting for tomorrow were often the same tasks that had waited yesterday. People knew what needed to be done. The routine was familiar. Comfort could be found in familiarity. A farmer stepping outside before dawn might have seen almost exactly what his father had seen many years earlier. The same river. The same fields. The same stars fading overhead. The same dusty road winding between homes. A society built around repeating cycles often develops patience. There is less pressure to reinvent everyday life when existing systems already support survival. Egypt offered stability that many ancient regions did not enjoy. Its river arrived predictably. Its farmland remained productive. Its communities stayed connected through waterways. When life remains relatively dependable, dramatic changes may seem unnecessary. Slow improvement often feels safer than sudden transformation. As the first sunlight touched the fields, workers moved outward from villages. Sandals brushed against packed earth. Voices carried softly through cool morning air. Farmers carried simple tools. Some guided animals. Others walked alone. The hours ahead would be long. The Egyptian sun was powerful. Everyone knew that by midday, the heat would become heavy. But mornings often held a quiet beauty. Light spread across green fields. Birds moved among reeds. River water reflected pale gold colors. For a short while, work began under gentle conditions. Yet even these peaceful mornings followed patterns established over countless years. Knowledge passed from parents to children. Not through books. Not through schools as many imagine them today. But through observation. Practice. Repetition. A young boy learned how to manage irrigation because older relatives showed him. A young girl learned household skills because experienced family members guided her. Craftsmen trained apprentices. Builders taught laborers. Scribes instructed younger students. The past lived inside daily habits. And because knowledge traveled through generations this way, traditions often remain strong. Change could happen. But change moved carefully. Slowly. Almost quietly. Meanwhile, in towns and larger settlements, workshops awakened alongside the fields. Potters shaped clay. Carpenters handled wood. Weavers prepared fibers. Metal workers organized tools. The smell of dust mixed with smoke from cooking fires. Hands repeated motions practiced thousands of times before. Some craftsmen spent decades perfecting a single skill. Their methods were trusted. Customers expected familiar results. There was little reason to abandon techniques that worked. Imagine a potter sitting before a wheel. His father had shaped vessels. His grandfather had shaped vessels. Customers wanted storage jars similar to those already used in homes and markets. The shape was known. The purpose was known. The process was known. Innovation could occur. But tradition carried weight. People often preferred what felt dependable. The same was true in many corners of Egyptian life. The familiar offered security. And security encouraged continuity. As the morning grew brighter, boats began moving along the Nile. Some carried grain. Others carried stone. Others transported travelers between settlements. The river functioned like a great road stretching through the country. Movement happened steadily. But movement itself often reinforced existing patterns. Trade connected communities. Communication linked regions. Officials traveled between locations. Information flowed. Yet much of that information encouraged organization rather than disruption. The government depended on order. Farmers depended on predictable schedules. Religious traditions depended on continuity. Many institutions worked together to preserve stability. And stability became one of Egypt's defining characteristics. By midday, heat settled heavily across the land. Workers slowed their pace. Sweat darkened clothing. Shade became precious. Some rested beneath trees. Others sheltered beside walls. The air shimmered above the ground. Even insects seemed quieter. In these hours, life felt slower still. Ancient Egypt was not a world rushing toward constant change. It was a world learning how to endure. Survival required effort. Food production required effort. Construction required effort. Transportation required effort. Most people devoted enormous amounts of energy simply maintaining daily life. When communities spend much of their time sustaining existing systems, large transformations often emerge gradually. People focus first on immediate needs. Water. Food. Shelter. Family. Tomorrow's harvest. Tomorrow's bread. Tomorrow's work. And so daily life continued. The same roads carried travelers. The same river carried boats. The same fields produced crops. The same homes sheltered families. Afternoon slowly drifted toward evening. Shadows lengthened. Heat softened. Workers returned from fields. Boats approached docks. Animals were guided home. Children played in open spaces between houses. The smell of baking bread spread through settlements. For many families, evening brought a rare chance to rest. Meals were prepared. Stories were shared. Repairs were completed. Simple conversations unfolded beneath fading light. No one knew they were living inside a civilization that would endure for thousands of years. They were simply living another day. Yet those ordinary days formed the foundation of Egypt's remarkable continuity. The strength of Egyptian society did not rest only with rulers. It rested with countless individuals repeating familiar routines. A farmer planting seeds. A baker kneading dough. A fisherman checking nets. A scribe recording grain deliveries. A laborer carrying stone. Together, these people created stability. And stability often encourages patience. Night gradually returned. Darkness spread across fields and waterways. Stars appeared one by one. The Nile reflected faint silver light. Inside homes, lamps flickered softly. People settled onto sleeping mats. Bodies tired from labor welcomed rest. Outside, villages became quiet. Only occasional sounds disturbed the silence. A distant animal. A soft conversation. The movement of water. Tomorrow would look much like today. And that expectation brought comfort. In many parts of the ancient world, uncertainty was constant. But along the Nile, predictability shaped daily experience. Not perfectly. Floods could vary. Illness could arrive. Difficult years existed. Yet compared with many neighboring regions, Egypt often enjoyed remarkable continuity. That continuity influenced how people thought about life. It influenced institutions. It influenced traditions. It influenced beliefs. If the world around you appears stable, there is less reason to imagine it changing dramatically. The rising river feels permanent. The fields feel permanent. The customs feel permanent. The old ways feel trustworthy. And so generation after generation carried those ways forward. While stars crossed slowly above the valley, scribes sometimes continued their work by lamplight. Their profession occupied a special place within society. Many Egyptians never learned formal writing. But scribes recorded information that helped keep the country organized. Taxes. Inventories. Official reports. Religious texts. Letters. Records. Writing preserved memory. Yet writing could also preserve tradition. Ancient texts remain valuable because they connected present generations to earlier ones. Students copied established forms. Language itself became a bridge reaching backward through time. A young scribe might spend years learning patterns already centuries old. The goal was often accuracy rather than invention. Respect for earlier knowledge encouraged continuity. The wisdom of ancestors carried authority. And authority often slows change. As the night deepened, cooler air finally drifted across the landscape. Families slept. Villages rested. The river continued flowing through darkness. Beyond the visible horizon, future generations waited. Children not yet born would someday walk these same roads. They would rise before dawn. They would work beneath the same sun. They would hear the same river. And in many ways, their lives would resemble those of people sleeping beside the Nile tonight. That quiet repetition is part of the answer we are seeking. Egypt changed slowly because its environment rewarded stability. Its river encouraged continuity. Its traditions valued preservation. Its institutions reinforced familiar patterns. And ordinary people, through countless daily routines, carried those patterns forward across centuries. The night remains peaceful. The lamps grow dim. The sound of flowing water dripped softly through the darkness. And somewhere beyond the reeds, another ancient morning is already waiting to arrive. Far out beyond the last clusters of homes, where cultivated fields slowly gave way to open stretches of desert, the night remained calm and almost motionless. The stars seemed unusually bright above ancient Egypt. Without modern lights, the sky revealed itself fully. Thousands of small points of light stretched from horizon to horizon. Farmers, fishermen, travelers, and laborers often knew these stars well. They watched them season after season, year after year. The heavens appeared orderly. The river appeared orderly. The turning of the seasons appeared orderly. For many Egyptians, the world itself seemed built upon a quiet balance. And when people believe the world is balanced, they often try to preserve that balance in their own lives. As darkness slowly softened toward dawn once again, the first signs of movement returned to the villages. A faint breeze moved across the reeds. Birds stirred near the water. A few lamps flickered awake inside homes. Another day was beginning. And it would look very much like the day before. That sameness was not usually viewed as a problem. In fact, for many people it was reassuring. A family waking before sunrise could feel comforted by knowing exactly what the day required. There were fields to tend, nets to repair, bread to bake, animals to feed, and tools to maintain. Life was demanding. But it was familiar. Familiarity can become a powerful force. Sometimes stronger than ambition. Sometimes stronger than curiosity. Not because people lacked imagination, but because survival depended upon routines that already worked. The Nile Valley rewarded consistency. A farmer who abandoned proven methods could risk his harvest. A fisherman who ignored generations of experience could return with empty baskets. A builder who rejected established techniques might weaken a structure that needed to endure the intense Egyptian climate. So knowledge accumulated carefully. Useful improvements were adopted. But they were often folded gently into existing traditions rather than replacing them entirely. As morning sunlight spread across the landscape, workers began appearing on the roads once more. The roads themselves were simple. Many were little more than well-worn paths created through repeated use. Sandals pressed into dusty ground. Donkeys carried loads between settlements. Merchants traveled with goods packed into baskets and containers. The pace was steady. No one hurried unnecessarily. The heat would arrive soon enough. A merchant making his way toward a nearby town might pass dozens of scenes that would have looked familiar to his ancestors. Women carrying water jars. Children helping with simple chores. Farmers inspecting irrigation channels. Workers transporting grain. Craftsmen opening workshops. Even the buildings often changed slowly. Mud brick remained one of the most practical materials available. It was affordable. It was accessible. And it worked well in the local climate. Generations built homes using methods their families already understood. Walls were repaired rather than replaced. Structures evolved gradually. Entire neighborhoods could maintain a familiar appearance for very long periods. The landscape itself encouraged continuity. The desert formed natural boundaries. Most people lived within the narrow fertile corridor created by the Nile. Communities remained connected through the river, yet somewhat protected from constant outside influence. Ideas from other lands certainly arrived. Traders brought goods. Travelers shared stories. Foreign peoples entered Egyptian history from time to time. Yet the Nile Valley retained a strong sense of identity. Its environment shaped everyday life so thoroughly that outside influences often blended into existing traditions rather than overturning them. By mid-morning, workshops filled with activity. Inside one workshop, a carpenter carefully smoothed a piece of wood. Inside another, a potter shaped wet clay beneath skilled hands. Elsewhere, a weaver sat before a loom. The repetitive sounds of work filled the air. Wood scraping. Thread pulling. Clay turning. Tools tapping softly. These sounds formed the background music of Egyptian towns. Many craftsmen spent years mastering precise techniques. A mistake could waste valuable materials. Skill required patience. Patience required repetition. And repetition reinforced tradition. Imagine a young apprentice entering a workshop for the first time. The master craftsman did not begin by encouraging experimentation. Instead, he taught established methods. The apprentice observed, practiced, repeated, corrected mistakes, practiced again. The goal was reliability. A customer purchasing pottery wanted a vessel that held water properly. A family ordering furniture wanted sturdy construction. Consistency mattered. When consistency becomes valuable, societies often change more gradually. The same principle could be found in Egyptian agriculture. The Nile remained at the center of nearly everything. Each year, farmers watched its waters closely. The annual flood was not merely an environmental event. It shaped the entire rhythm of life. People learned to anticipate it, prepare for it, depend upon it. When floodwaters arrived, they spread fertile soil across fields. When waters withdrew, planting began. This pattern repeated for centuries. Children grew up expecting it. Parents planned around it. Officials organized resources around it. Entire communities synchronized their lives with the river's behavior. A cycle repeated long enough can feel timeless. By noon, the heat once again settled heavily across the valley. The sun stood high overhead. Dust hung in the air. Shadows became small and precious. Workers wiped sweat from their faces. Animals sought shelter where they could find it. The pace of labor naturally slowed. Heat demanded respect. Ancient Egyptians understood this well. Many tasks were arranged around the climate. Hard work often began early. Rest periods became important during the hottest hours. Then activity increased again later in the day. These routines were practical responses to local conditions. And because the conditions remained relatively constant, the routines remained relatively constant as well. Even food preparation reflected long-standing habits. Inside homes, grain was ground into flour. Bread was baked in ovens. Vegetables were prepared. Fish from the Nile appeared in many meals. The smells of cooking drifted through neighborhoods. Warm bread. Smoke from cooking fires. Freshly prepared food. Many recipes changed only gradually over generations. Families passed techniques to children just as farmers passed agricultural knowledge and craftsmen passed workshop skills. Daily life contained thousands of small acts of cultural preservation. Most people never thought of it that way. They were simply doing what their parents had done, and what their parents had learned from earlier generations. In the afternoon, scribes continued their careful work. Their world was quieter than that of many laborers, but equally shaped by tradition. Rows of records filled documents. Official language followed established forms. Students copied examples repeatedly. Writing linked the present to the past. A record created centuries earlier could still influence how a new document was prepared. In this way, memory itself became institutional. The accumulated experience of previous generations remained accessible. That continuity strengthened stability. It also encouraged respect for established practices. A young scribe often learned not only how to write, but how to think within long-standing systems of organization. The authority of tradition appeared everywhere. In administration, in religion, in education, in agriculture, in craftsmanship, in family life. As afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, shadows lengthened across the fields. The harshest heat began to fade. Workers looked forward to returning home. Some carried tools. Others carried baskets. Boats moved steadily along the river. The Nile reflected the warm colors of the lowering sun. A fisherman checking his nets might pause for a moment and look across the water. The scene before him could have felt almost unchanged from the stories told by older generations. The same river, the same reeds, the same birds, the same broad sky. Of course, changes did occur. New rulers came and went. Buildings were constructed. Technologies improved. Trade networks expanded and shifted. But many of these changes unfolded so gradually that ordinary people experienced them as part of a continuous flow rather than a series of sudden transformations. For a farmer living in a small village, the passage of decades might bring only subtle differences. Fields remained fields. Harvests remained harvests. Family responsibilities remained familiar. The larger world changed around him, yet daily life often retained a recognizable shape. As evening approached, the atmosphere softened. Children returned from errands and chores. Cooking fires burned steadily. Conversations drifted through open doorways. Neighbors exchanged news. Animals settled for the night. The smell of bread once again filled the air. Many people spent their evenings repairing tools, preparing supplies, or completing small household tasks. Even rest often involved work of some kind. Life required constant effort. But there was comfort in routine effort. The known task often feels lighter than the unknown one. And so traditions survived partly because they reduced uncertainty. People knew how to perform them. They knew what results to expect. They knew how those practices fit into community life. Across the Nile Valley, countless small decisions favored continuity over disruption. A farmer chose the method that had worked before. A craftsman used familiar techniques. A family followed established customs. An official relied on trusted procedures. None of these individual choices seemed especially important on their own. Yet together they created remarkable stability. The effect accumulated slowly across generations. Like layers of fertile soil deposited by the Nile itself. Thin layers. Almost invisible at first. But powerful over time. Darkness gradually returned. The sky deepened into shades of blue and black. Stars emerged overhead. The sounds of labor faded. The sounds of night replaced them. Crickets. Distant animals. The quiet movement of water. Inside homes, tired workers stretched out on sleeping mats. Muscles ached from long days. Hands showed signs of hard labor. Faces carried the marks of sun and wind. Tomorrow would bring more work. Everyone understood this. But tomorrow would also bring familiar routines. And familiarity can make even difficult lives feel manageable. Beyond the villages, the desert remained silent. Its vast open spaces seemed almost eternal. For generations, Egyptians had looked toward those distant sands and seen the same horizons. The landscape itself appeared enduring. Permanent. Unchanging. Perhaps that too influenced how people viewed their society. When surrounded by features that seem timeless, change can feel less urgent. The desert waited quietly. The river flowed steadily. The stars crossed the sky. And beneath them all, Egyptian society continued along pathways worn smooth by centuries of repetition. A child sleeping tonight might someday become a farmer. Or a scribe. Or a craftsman. Or a merchant. The details of life would differ. Yet many of the rhythms would remain familiar. Morning labor. Afternoon heat. Evening meals. Nighttime rest. The same cycle continued. Slowly. Patiently. Like the steady flow of the Nile itself. And while generations came and went, these quiet patterns helped explain why Egyptian society could remain recognizable for such a very long time. The river moved through the darkness. A cool breeze brushed the reeds. Lamps faded one by one. And another peaceful Egyptian night settled gently across the valley. The night rested softly over the Nile Valley. Most homes were quiet now. The sounds of conversation had faded. Cooking fires had burned low. Lamps flickered behind a few doorways, but many families were already asleep. The river continued its endless journey through the darkness. Its waters slipped past villages, fields, docks, and temples with the same patient rhythm they had followed for countless generations. A fisherman lying on a simple sleeping mat might still hear the distant movement of water beyond the walls of his home. A farmer resting after a long day could feel the cooler air entering through a small opening in the mud-brick walls. Children slept beside parents. Tools rested against walls. Baskets sat empty until morning. Everything seemed still. Yet even during these quiet hours, the foundations of Egyptian society remained at work. The habits of daily life. The routines of labor. The expectations passed from one generation to another. These things continued even while people slept. And they played a large part in explaining why change often arrived so slowly. As the first pale light appeared along the eastern horizon, another day began much as countless others had begun before it. A rooster called somewhere in the distance. A dog barked briefly. The sky brightened little by little. Inside homes, families stirred awake. Many people rose before sunrise. The coolest hours of the day were valuable. Work completed early required less effort than work completed beneath the fierce afternoon sun. Women began preparing food. Grain was ground into flour. Water jars were checked and filled. Simple breakfasts were arranged. The sound of grinding stones echoed softly through neighborhoods. It was one of the most familiar sounds in ancient Egypt. A visitor arriving from another land might have noticed it immediately. Long before the streets became crowded, before workshops opened, before boats departed, people were already preparing food. Bread stood at the center of daily life. The work required to create it was constant. Grain had to be grown, harvested, stored, ground into flour, mixed, baked. Every step demanded labor. Every step depended upon systems that had been refined over many generations. The process worked. And because it worked, there was little reason to abandon it. This practical way of thinking appeared throughout Egyptian society. People valued methods that proved reliable. The river was reliable. The agricultural cycle was reliable. Traditional skills were reliable. Stability became a kind of treasure. Not something dramatic. Not something people celebrated every day. But something quietly appreciated. A stable harvest meant food. A stable household meant security. A stable community meant survival. As morning spread across the valley, farmers moved toward the fields. Many walked paths worn smooth by years of use. Some carried wooden tools over their shoulders. Others guided animals. The land around them looked much as it had looked for generations. Green fields stretched beside the river. Palm trees stood against the brightening sky. Birds moved among reeds along the water. Dust rose beneath steady footsteps. For a farmer, the landscape itself reinforced continuity. The same landmarks remained year after year. The same fields often stayed within the same families. Knowledge about those fields accumulated slowly. People learned which areas retained moisture longest. Which sections produced stronger harvests. Which channels required attention after flooding. This knowledge became deeply local. Deeply personal. And deeply traditional. A father passed it to a son. A mother shared it with a daughter. Grandparents told stories about seasons long past. The memory of the community lived within its people. There was rarely a need to reinvent everything. The old knowledge already existed. Meanwhile, on the Nile itself, boats began appearing with the morning light. Their sails caught gentle breezes. Their crews moved with practiced confidence. Some transported grain. Others carried stone. Some moved livestock. Others carried merchants and travelers. The river connected distant settlements. Yet even this movement often strengthened existing systems instead of replacing them. Trade allowed communities to obtain needed goods. Officials traveled between regions. Messages spread. Resources circulated. But the Nile also acted like a spine running through the country, holding many different communities together within one familiar framework. People traveled. Goods traveled. Ideas traveled. Yet the structure of society remained remarkably steady. The river encouraged connection without constant disruption. As the sun climbed higher, towns became busier. Workshops filled with activity. The smell of fresh wood shavings drifted from carpenters' shops. Potters worked carefully beside spinning wheels. Metal workers shaped tools. Weavers focused on their looms. The sounds blended together into a steady rhythm. Not loud. Not chaotic. Simply constant. An apprentice entering one of these workshops faced years of learning. The process was slow. Patience was expected. Mastery required repetition. The apprentice watched. Copied. Practiced. Improved little by little. No one expected instant results. Skill emerged gradually. And because training followed established traditions, craftsmanship often remained consistent across generations. Imagine a workshop that had operated for decades. Perhaps even longer. The tools changed only slightly. The methods remained familiar. Customers expected certain standards. The master craftsman taught proven techniques. The apprentice eventually became a master and taught the next generation. The cycle continued. Not frozen. Not completely unchanged. But moving at a measured pace. Like the river itself. Slow enough that continuity remained visible. As midday approached, the heat strengthened. Sunlight reflected from stone walls. Dusty roads shimmered. Workers sought shade whenever possible. Some rested briefly beneath trees. Others sat beside buildings. Water became precious. The Egyptian climate shaped behavior in countless ways. It influenced work schedules, building design, clothing choices, even social routines. Many homes were designed to provide relief from heat. Thick mud brick walls helped moderate temperatures. Small openings limited direct sunlight. Flat roofs sometimes offered cooler places during the evening. People adapted carefully to their environment. And because the environment remained relatively consistent, those adaptations remained useful generation after generation. A successful solution often survives for a very long time. This was true not only for buildings but for institutions as well. Egyptian administration developed systems that helped organize resources, labor, and taxation. Officials recorded information. Scribes maintained documents. Supervisors managed projects. The details evolved over time, but the overall structure emphasized order and continuity. Order mattered deeply. Not simply because rulers desired it, but because large populations depended upon coordinated effort. Fields required management. Storage facilities required oversight. Construction projects required planning. The larger the society became, the more valuable reliable systems appeared. Reliable systems often resist sudden change. Not because change is impossible, but because stability itself becomes useful. During the hottest part of the afternoon, activity slowed once again. The valley seemed quieter. Even animals appeared less energetic. Workers moved more carefully. The heavy air encouraged patience. And patience was something Egyptian society possessed in abundance. Monuments were built over years. Fields produced harvests through seasonal cycles. Craftsmen spent decades refining skills. Families accumulated knowledge across generations. Life was measured not only in days, but in seasons and lifetimes. This long perspective helped sustain continuity. A person planting a tree might never enjoy its full shade. A craftsman teaching an apprentice might never see the student's greatest achievements. A parent teaching practical skills might never witness every benefit those lessons would provide. Yet people invested in the future anyway, because they trusted that the patterns of life would continue. As afternoon slowly softened toward evening, workers began making their way home. The return journey often felt different from the morning departure. Bodies were tired. Tools felt heavier. The day's labor lingered in aching muscles. But there was comfort in returning. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Voices drifted through streets. Children played near doorways. The smell of baking bread once again filled the air. Evening brought a different kind of work. Meals had to be prepared. Clothing repaired. Tools maintained. Animals checked. Water carried. The labor never truly ended. Yet evenings also offered moments of connection. Families gathered together. Stories were shared. News traveled from neighbor to neighbor. Older relatives spoke about earlier times. Children listened. Not every story involved famous rulers or great events. Many stories focused on ordinary experiences. Harvests. Journeys. Family members. Weather. Work. These small stories helped preserve community memory. And community memory helped preserve tradition. The past remained present through conversation. As darkness returned, lamps illuminated small sections of homes. Soft light reflected from walls. Shadows moved gently. Outside, stars emerged one by one. The sky over ancient Egypt often felt immense. Endless. Watching those stars night after night may have encouraged a sense of permanence. The heavens seemed dependable. The river seemed dependable. The cycle of seasons seemed dependable. People naturally looked for stability because stability appeared everywhere around them. That does not mean life was easy. Far from it. Many Egyptians worked extremely hard. Injuries happened. Illness occurred. Harvests could disappoint. Families faced hardships. Yet even difficulties often unfolded within familiar frameworks. Communities knew how to respond. Traditions offered guidance. Customs provided structure. Shared experience created resilience. The old ways survived partly because they had already helped people endure difficult times before. Night deepened. The village grew quieter. One by one, lamps faded. Families settled onto sleeping mats. The air cooled. A gentle breeze moved through reeds along the riverbank. Far away, water flowed steadily beneath the stars. Tomorrow would bring another dawn. Another day of labor. Another cycle of familiar routines. And across the centuries, millions of such ordinary days would shape the character of Egyptian society far more than any single ruler or event. The slow rhythm of life continued. The river continued. The stars continued. And beneath their watchful presence, Egyptian society carried its traditions forward with remarkable patience, preserving old patterns so carefully that generation after generation could still recognize the world inherited from those who came before. The Nile flowed quietly through the darkness. The desert rested beyond the fields. And another peaceful Egyptian night settled softly across the ancient land. The darkness lingered gently over the Nile Valley. A faint silver light rested upon the river. The water moved so calmly that it seemed almost asleep. Along the banks, reeds swayed in the cool air. Small insects drifted through the night. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called once and then fell silent again. Most homes were dark. Most workers were resting. The long day had ended, and tired bodies welcomed the comfort of sleep. Yet even in these quiet hours, the rhythms that shaped Egyptian life continued their slow and steady course. The river flowed. The stars crossed the sky. Time moved forward almost unnoticed. And that was often how change happened in ancient Egypt as well. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. but slowly enough that many people barely noticed it while it was taking place. A child born into one generation might inherit customs that seemed ancient already. Those customs had survived because they fit comfortably into everyday life. They provided answers. They offered structure. They helped people understand their place in the world. And when a tradition continues solving practical problems, people often keep it close. As the eastern horizon slowly brightened, another morning approached. The stars faded one by one. The sky shifted from black to deep blue. Then pale gray. Then soft gold. Birds stirred among the reeds. The first sounds of activity appeared within the villages. A door opened. Footsteps crossed a courtyard. A water jar was lifted. The day began quietly. Inside a modest mud-bricked home, a family woke before sunrise. The walls still held traces of the cool night air. Sleeping mats were rolled aside. Simple possessions were arranged neatly. There was little wasted space. Most homes were practical places designed for daily needs rather than comfort alone. The people who lived within them spent much of their lives working. Their homes reflected that reality. Tools hung from walls. Storage containers held grain. Baskets waited near doorways. Everything had a purpose. And purpose was important in Egyptian life. A tool existed because it performed a task. A routine existed because it helped people survive. A tradition survived because it remained useful. These practical habits helped create a culture that valued continuity. The familiar method was trusted because experience had already tested it. Outside, the village gradually awakened. Smoke rose from cooking fires. The smell of fresh bread began spreading through the cool morning air. Women prepared meals. Children helped with chores. Men gathered tools before leaving for work. Neighbors exchanged greetings. Many of these interactions happened in nearly the same way every day. There was comfort in that repetition. People knew where they belonged. They knew what was expected of them. They knew how the day would likely unfold. For much of the population, life was not organized around dramatic ambitions. It was organized around responsibility. Fields required attention. Families required care. Work required effort. And these responsibilities often left little room for radical change. A farmer standing beside his field at sunrise was usually thinking about irrigation, weather, soil, and harvests. He was not trying to reinvent agriculture. He was trying to ensure that food would exist months later. The needs of daily life encouraged practical thinking. And practical thinking often favored proven methods. As sunlight spread across the valley, workers traveled toward fields and workshops. Dust rose beneath sandals. Donkeys carried supplies. Boats moved slowly along the river. Everywhere, people began the labor that sustained society. Much of that labor depended upon cooperation. A single farmer could accomplish only so much alone. Irrigation channels required collective effort. Large harvests required many hands. Construction projects required coordination. Communities learned to work together because cooperation improved survival. And cooperation often encourages stability. People become invested in shared systems. They rely upon one another. They develop expectations and routines that help maintain order. Over time, these shared habits become traditions. Traditions become institutions. Institutions become part of everyday life. The process happens so gradually that few people notice its full scale. The Nile itself encouraged this kind of collective thinking. Its waters benefited entire communities. Floods affected many families at once. Successful farming depended upon managing resources together. People could not simply ignore one another. The river connected them. Its influence reached into nearly every aspect of life. And because the river's annual patterns remained relatively consistent, communities organized themselves around predictable cycles. Year after year. Generation after generation, the same sequence returned. Flooding, planting, growing, harvesting, restoring, then beginning again. This cycle became deeply familiar. It shaped calendars, work schedules, religious ceremonies, family plans, economic activities. The rhythm of the river became the rhythm of society. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher. The air grew warmer. Fields shimmered beneath bright light. Workers bent over crops. Others repaired channels carrying water through farmland. The work could be exhausting. Ancient Egyptian agriculture demanded patience and endurance. Hours passed slowly beneath the sun. Sweat gathered. Muscles tired. Yet labor continued. Many workers performed similar tasks throughout much of their lives. The repetition was not always easy. But it created expertise. People became highly skilled at managing familiar responsibilities. And highly skilled communities often preserve methods that have proven successful. A farmer who understood his land deeply might see little reason to abandon practices that consistently produced harvests. A craftsman who had spent decades mastering a technique might naturally teach that same technique to an apprentice. Knowledge accumulated slowly and was passed carefully from one generation to the next. The process resembled the flow of the Nile itself. Steady, reliable, continuous. Meanwhile, within towns and administrative centers, scribes worked quietly at their tasks. Theirs was a different kind of labor. Instead of carrying tools through fields, they carried knowledge. They recorded information, tracked resources, copied documents, prepared official records. Writing required training, and training required years of practice. Young students learned signs and symbols through repetition. Again and again they copied examples. Again and again they corrected mistakes. The process rewarded patience. Accuracy mattered. Tradition mattered. The authority of older texts mattered. A scribe often learned by studying works created long before his own lifetime. The past remained present through written records. This connection to earlier generations strengthened continuity throughout society. Ancient wisdom carried weight. Established practices carried weight. The experience of ancestors carried weight. As a result, new ideas often entered Egyptian life slowly. Not because people rejected all change, but because change was measured against long-standing traditions. The question was not simply whether something was new. The question was whether it improved upon what already existed. And many existing systems worked remarkably well. By afternoon, the heat settled heavily across the valley. Shadows shortened. The bright sunlight seemed almost motionless. Workers searched for moments of relief. A patch of shade beneath a tree. A cool breeze from the river. A brief pause beside a wall. The climate shaped daily behavior in subtle ways. People learned when to work hardest, when to rest, when to travel, when to remain indoors. Over centuries, these habits became deeply rooted. The environment taught lessons that did not need to be relearned each generation. Knowledge passed naturally from older people to younger ones. Not through formal instruction alone, but through observation. Children watched adults. They copied routines. They absorbed customs. They learned how life functioned simply by participating in it. A young child accompanying parents through daily tasks received an education that stretched far beyond words. They learned how bread was made, how water was carried, how fields were managed, how neighbors cooperated, how households functioned. This constant transfer of practical knowledge helped preserve stability. The next generation inherited not only possessions, but habits. And habits often survive longer than objects. As afternoon slowly faded toward evening, activity increased once more. The worst heat began to retreat. Workers completed final tasks before returning home. Boats approached docks. Animals were gathered. Tools were carried back to storage areas. The valley softened beneath warmer colors as the sun lowered toward the horizon. This transition between day and night was often one of the most pleasant times. The air cooled gradually. Long shadows stretched across fields. The intense brightness faded. People felt the relief that comes after hard work. Families reunited. Meals were prepared. Voices drifted through village streets. The smell of baking bread returned once more. Simple meals appeared on low tables. Fish from the river. Fresh bread. Vegetables. Food that reflected the landscape itself. Food that generations before had also eaten. The continuity extended even to taste and smell. Many experiences connected people directly to the past without them fully realizing it. The bread tasted familiar. The fields looked familiar. The river sounded familiar. Life carried echoes of earlier generations everywhere. Night approached slowly. The first stars appeared overhead. Children grew sleepy. Workers rested aching muscles. Conversations became quieter. One by one, lamps illuminated homes. Their soft light glowed against mud brick walls. Outside, darkness gathered gently across the valley. The river reflected starlight. The desert beyond the fields disappeared into shadow. And once again ancient Egypt settled into peaceful silence. Tomorrow would arrive. The routines would continue. The river would flow. The fields would wait. The workshops would open. The bread would bake. And through these countless ordinary days, Egyptian society would continue preserving its familiar patterns, carrying traditions forward with a patience that stretched across centuries like the slow and endless movement of the Nile beneath the stars. The Nile flowed quietly beneath the stars. Its dark waters reflected scattered points of light from the sky above. Along the riverbanks, reeds whispered softly whenever a breeze passed through them. The desert beyond remained silent, resting beneath a blanket of darkness that seemed endless. Most of Egypt slept. The labor of the day had ended. Fields rested. Workshops stood empty. Boats rocked gently against wooden docks. The sounds of human activity had faded into the background, leaving only the steady presence of water, wind, and distant night creatures. These peaceful hours were familiar to generations of Egyptians. A farmer sleeping beside the river 1,000 years earlier would have recognized much of the same atmosphere. The cool night air. The quiet villages. The stars stretching across the heavens. The soft sound of moving water. The continuity of these experiences shaped how people understood the world around them. Life seemed stable. The landscape seemed stable. The heavens seemed stable. And stability encouraged trust in established ways of living. As the night slowly gave way to dawn, a pale band of light appeared along the horizon. The darkness retreated little by little. Birds awakened among the reeds. The village stirred. Another day was beginning. Inside a small mud brick house, a family rose from sleep. The home was simple but practical. Its thick walls offered protection from heat. Its roof provided shelter from the sun. Storage jars lined one corner. Tools rested in another. The household had likely looked much the same for many years. Repairs had been made. Small improvements added. Yet the basic structure remained familiar. Throughout Egypt, homes often changed slowly because they already met the needs of the people living inside them. The same principle appeared again and again throughout society. When something worked reasonably well, there was little pressure to replace it. People improved what existed. They repaired it, adjusted it, passed it forward. But complete transformation was rare. Outside, the village streets gradually filled with movement. Women carried water jars. Children assisted with morning chores. Men gathered tools before leaving for work. The smell of baking bread drifted through the air. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Voices mingled softly with the sounds of animals beginning their day. Everywhere there was motion. Yet it was organized motion. Purposeful motion. People knew what needed to be done. Their responsibilities were familiar. The expectations of daily life were clear. A young person growing up in such an environment often understood from an early age what adulthood would involve. Not every detail, of course. But the general shape of life was visible. Fields would need tending. Families would need supporting. Skills would need learning. Responsibilities would need carrying. The future felt connected to the past. One generation flowed naturally into the next. As the sun climbed higher, activity spread across the countryside. Farmers entered the fields. Fishermen launched boats. Craftsmen opened workshops. Merchants prepared goods for trade. The economy of ancient Egypt depended upon countless ordinary workers. Their labor sustained the entire society. And because much of that labor relied upon techniques refined over centuries, traditions remained deeply rooted. Consider a fisherman preparing his nets beside the Nile. The river was generous, but success still required knowledge. Where fish gathered. How currents behaved. Which seasons brought different opportunities. Such understanding came from experience. And experience was usually shared through families and communities. A father taught a son. An older fisherman advised a younger one. Knowledge passed directly from person to person. This process strengthened continuity. The next generation inherited not only tools, but expertise. And inherited expertise often encourages inherited methods. Nearby, farmers worked beneath the growing heat. The fields stretched outward from irrigation channels fed by the river. Every section of cultivated land represented generations of effort. Channels had been dug. Boundaries established. Knowledge accumulated. Families knew their fields intimately. They understood the soil, the water, the timing of planting and harvest. The environment rewarded careful observation. Over many centuries, Egyptians became remarkably skilled at working within these conditions. Their agricultural success supported large populations. Large populations supported specialized occupations. And specialized occupations created an interconnected society built upon stability. As morning became afternoon, workshops buzzed with activity. The sounds varied from street to street. A hammer striking metal. A chisel shaping stone. A loom moving thread into cloth. A potter turning clay. Each sound represented labor. Each labor represented skill. And each skill represented years of learning. A craftsman rarely became skilled overnight. Mastery required patience. Many apprentices spent years observing experienced workers before taking on major responsibilities themselves. This long learning process naturally favored tradition. New generations entered established systems rather than creating entirely new ones. The workshop itself became a place where the past remained alive. Techniques survived because they were taught repeatedly. Methods endured because they continued producing useful results. The continuity of craftsmanship mirrored the continuity of society as a whole. By midday, heat settled across the valley like a heavy blanket. The sunlight seemed almost solid. Dust shimmered above roads. Workers moved more slowly. Shade became precious. Even the animals appeared quieter. Many Egyptians organized their lives around these daily changes in temperature. Hard labor often began early. The hottest hours encouraged caution. Then activity resumed as evening approached. These rhythms were so deeply connected to the environment that they remained useful generation after generation. The land itself encouraged consistency. The climate rewarded adaptation rather than constant reinvention. Meanwhile, scribes sat at work recording information. Their world differed greatly from that of farmers and laborers, yet it too emphasized continuity. Records preserved memory. Documents preserved agreements. Administrative systems preserved organization. A scribe often worked within forms that had existed long before he was born. Language itself carried history forward. Ancient expressions survived in official writing. Traditional styles remained respected. The written word linked present generations to those who had come before. This connection to the past influenced how Egyptians viewed authority. Old knowledge carried prestige. Established customs carried legitimacy. Tradition itself became a source of stability. As afternoon slowly softened, workers began looking toward evening. The intense heat weakened. A cooler breeze drifted across the river. Long shadows stretched over fields. The pace of life changed once again. Farmers gathered tools. Craftsmen cleaned work areas. Boats returned toward docks. Merchants concluded business. People began making their way home. The roads filled with familiar faces. Neighbors greeted one another. Families reunited after long hours of labor. Children ran through village streets. Cooking fires came alive. The smell of food spread through the air. Evening meals represented another important form of continuity. Families often ate foods that generations before had also known. Bread remained central. Fish remained common. Vegetables and fruits reflected the local environment. The meals were simple. Yet they connected people to the land and to one another. Food carried memory. A familiar meal could link the present moment to countless evenings in the past. After eating, many people continued working in small ways. Tools required repair. Baskets required mending. Supplies required preparation. Life demanded constant attention. Yet these tasks also offered opportunities for conversation. Family members talked while they worked. Stories passed from one generation to the next. Older relatives shared memories. Children listened. These stories were not always grand historical accounts. Many concerned ordinary experiences. Harvests. Journeys. Neighbors. Weather. Work. But such stories helped preserve community identity. They reminded people where they came from. And where they belonged. Belonging was important. Ancient Egyptian society was built upon networks of relationships. Families. Villages. Work groups. Communities. Individuals rarely lived in isolation. They relied upon one another. Shared expectations created trust. Shared traditions strengthened cooperation. The longer these traditions survived, the more natural they appeared. People often followed them without consciously thinking about their origins. The customs simply felt like part of life itself. Night arrived gradually. The western horizon darkened. Stars appeared overhead. The air cooled. The sounds of work disappeared. Lamps glowed behind doorways. The village became quieter. One by one, families prepared for sleep. Bodies tired from labor welcomed rest. The earth released the heat it had stored throughout the day. A gentle calm settled across the valley. The Nile continued moving through the darkness. Steady. Patient. Unhurried. Much like Egyptian society itself. Century after century, life along the river was shaped by repetition, routine, and accumulated experience. Change occurred. New rulers came. New buildings rose. New ideas appeared. Yet the foundations of everyday life remained remarkably durable. People still woke before sunrise. Still worked beneath the sun. Still depended upon the river. Still taught children the skills needed for survival. The continuity of ordinary life became one of the great strengths of Egyptian civilization. Not because people resisted every new idea, but because the systems they had inherited often continued serving them well. The river flowed. The seasons returned. The harvests followed familiar patterns. And beneath the vast canopy of stars, generation after generation found comfort in the steady rhythms of a world that changed slowly, patiently, and almost as quietly as the Nile moving through the night. The night over the Nile Valley felt deeper now. Not darker in a sudden way, but slowly deepening, like ink spreading gently across water. The stars were steady above, unchanged in their quiet positions. The river below continued its long, patient movement through the land. Everything felt familiar. Everything felt as if it had always been this way. And in many ways, that feeling shaped how life continued in ancient Egypt. Long before sunrise, before the first smoke rose from cooking fires, before footsteps returned to dusty paths, the village remained still. People slept in simple homes made of mud brick. Walls that had been shaped by hands long forgotten. Roofs that had been repaired again and again across generations. Inside these homes, families rested closely together, sharing warmth during the cooler hours of night. Outside, the world belonged to silence. Only the river remained active in its quiet way. Flowing. Carrying. Continuing. When dawn began to return, it did so gently. A soft gray light first touched the edges of the horizon. Then a faint gold slowly spread across the sky. Birds began to stir again among the reeds. Small movements returned to the landscape. A fisherman adjusting his nets near the shore might have been the first person awake in a village. A baker tending an early fire might have already been shaping dough in preparation for the long day ahead. A farmer might have stepped outside, feeling the cool air before the heat returned. These moments were not marked by urgency. They were part of a rhythm that had been followed for centuries. The beginning of the day was never a surprise. It was expected. It was known. And this deep sense of predictability is one of the quiet reasons Egyptian society changed so slowly. When life follows a familiar pattern, there is less pressure to imagine something completely different. People do not feel lost. They feel guided by experience, by memory, by tradition. Inside one home, a family prepared for the day as they had done countless times before. Water was poured from a jar. Bread was broken and shared. Simple words were spoken between family members, soft and ordinary. Nothing in the moment suggested that it was part of something vast and ancient. It was just mourning. But mourning repeated across thousands of years becomes something larger. A structure of life. A pattern of civilization. Outside, the village gradually filled with movement. The sound of grinding grain returned. The sound of footsteps on packed earth returned. The sound of distant animals calling returned. Smoke rose from small cooking fires scattered through the settlement. The smell of bread spread into the air, warm and familiar. People moved toward their tasks. The same tasks that had shaped their parents' lives, and their parents before them. Farmers walked toward fields that had been worked for generations. The land itself held memory. Not memory in words, but memory in use. Irrigation channels followed paths carved long ago. Boundaries between fields reflected decisions made in earlier times. Each generation inherited a landscape already shaped by those who came before. A farmer might adjust a channel, repair a boundary, improve a section of soil. But the overall structure remained. Because it worked. Because it had always worked well enough. The Nile supported this kind of continuity. Its predictable cycle of flooding and retreat created a dependable agricultural system. People learned when to prepare, when to plant, when to harvest. These patterns became deeply embedded in community life. Not written only in records, but written in behavior, in habit, in expectation. As the sun rose higher, workers spread across the valley. Some tended crops. Some guided animals. Some repaired tools. Some carried water between fields and homes. The work was constant, but not chaotic. It followed a rhythm that felt almost natural, like breathing. Even movement along the river reflected this rhythm. Boats drifted slowly in the morning light. Their sails caught gentle wind. Oars dipped into water with steady motion. Goods were transported between settlements that depended on one another. Grain, stone, clay, fish, textiles. Each item moved through a system that had been refined over long periods of time. Trade did not disrupt the structure of society. It moved within it, supporting it, strengthening it. By mid-morning, the heat began to build. The sun climbed higher. Shadows shortened. The air grew heavier. Work slowed slightly, not because people stopped, but because the environment required caution. Egyptians understood this well. The land taught patience. Labor was adjusted to the climate, not forced against it. Work early. Rest during heat. Work again as evening returned. This pattern repeated so often that it became part of daily life without needing explanation. Children learned it simply by living within it. They watched adults pause during the hottest hours. They watched activity return when the air cooled. They absorbed these rhythms as naturally as they learned language. In workshops, craftsmen continued their steady labor. Wood was shaped. Stone was carved. Metal was formed. Thread was woven. Clay was spun and dried. Each craft required skill built slowly over time. There was no shortcut to mastery. A young apprentice might spend years simply observing before being trusted with important tasks. This slow training preserved consistency. Methods were passed carefully from master to student. Not through rapid innovation, but through repetition and correction. A slight adjustment might occur here or there, but the core techniques remained stable. Because stability produced reliable results. And reliability was valuable in a society where daily life depended on dependable tools and goods. Meanwhile, scribes continued their quiet work in shaded rooms or administrative spaces. Their writing preserved the structure of society. Records of grain stored. Records of labor assigned. Records of taxes collected. Records of offerings made. The written word gave form to organization. And organization helped maintain order across a large and complex civilization. But writing also preserved tradition. Older texts were copied carefully. Forms were repeated. Styles remained respected. A young scribe learned not only how to write, but how to think within established patterns. Even language itself carried echoes of earlier generations. Phrases passed forward like inherited objects. Unchanged for long periods. Or only slowly adapted. As afternoon arrived, heat again became intense. The valley quieted slightly. Movement slowed. Rest became important. Some workers paused under shade. Others stayed near riverbanks where air felt cooler. The sun pressed heavily over fields and stone structures. Even sound seemed softened by the heat. Yet life did not stop. It simply adjusted. This adjustment itself became part of the culture. A kind of collective understanding passed through time. Do not rush the midday. Wait for the evening. Return when the air softens. Such simple knowledge, repeated endlessly, becomes part of a civilization's rhythm. And when rhythms remain stable, societies often change slowly. Not because they cannot change, but because they are already functioning within patterns that feel sufficient. As the sun began its slow descent, relief spread across the land. Shadows stretched longer once again. The air cooled little by little. Activity increased. Farmers gathered tools and began returning from fields. Boats moved back toward docks. Workshops prepared to close for the day. The movement of people returned across roads and paths, like a tide flowing inward. Evening in ancient Egypt carried a gentle sense of return. Return to home. Return to family. Return to rest. Cooking fires lit once more. Bread was prepared again. Simple meals were shared. Fish from the river, grain from the fields, vegetables from small gardens. The same kinds of food eaten across generations. Not identical in every detail, but familiar in nature. Meals carried continuity in taste, in preparation, in purpose. Food was not only nourishment. It was memory. It was repetition made visible. As night approached, conversation softened. People spoke in quieter voices. Children grew tired and leaned against family members. Elders rested after long days. The village gradually settled into calm. Lamps were lit one by one. Soft light appeared behind doorways. Shadows moved gently along walls. Outside, the sky darkened again. Stars returned. The river reflected their light. And once more, the Nile continued its endless journey through the land. Slow. Steady. Unchanging in appearance to those who lived beside it. Across this world, life did not rush toward transformation. It moved with patience. It followed patterns shaped by environment, labor, and shared memory. Each generation inherited a structure already proven to work. And because it worked, it endured. Not perfectly. Not without change. But with a remarkable steadiness that stretched across centuries like the quiet flow of water through the night. The village grew silent again. The desert beyond remained still. The stars continued their slow passage overhead. And ancient Egypt rested once more beneath the same calm sky that had watched over countless nights before it. The night in ancient Egypt settles in a way that feels almost complete. Not sudden. Not heavy. But gradual, like a soft cloth being laid over the land. The Nile keeps moving through it all. Quiet water passing fields, villages, and distant temples, as if it has no memory of time, only motion. Most people are asleep now. Their bodies rest after a full day shaped by heat, labor, and routine. Inside small homes, families lie close together on simple mats. The air is cooler than it was during the day, but still warm enough to keep doors open in many places. A faint breeze moves through narrow streets. It carries the smell of dry earth, river water, and the last traces of cooking fires. In this silence, the idea of change feels distant. Not because change does not exist, but because daily life is so steady that change rarely feels urgent. The rhythm of survival is already known. And when life is known, it often continues in familiar form. As the eastern sky begins to lighten again, the valley slowly wakes. The first light touches the river before it reaches the land. Water reflects pale gold, then soft silver, then a quiet blue. Birds begin to call again from the reeds. A new day arrives without ceremony. It simply appears, as it always has. Inside homes, movement begins. A hand reaches for a water jar. A mat is rolled aside. A fire is rekindled. A family rises into another cycle of work. There is no question of whether the day will be different. Only the understanding that it will follow what has come before. Breakfast is simple. Bread prepared from grain that has been carefully stored. Water drawn from jars kept cool through the night. Sometimes dates or vegetables when they are available. Food is not elaborate. It does not need to be. It only needs to sustain energy for the work ahead. Outside, the village begins to breathe again. Smoke rises in thin streams from cooking fires. The smell of baking bread drifts through open spaces between homes. Children help carry small tasks without needing to be told. They have seen this pattern many times before. Everything feels learned already, even before it is spoken. This is one of the quiet reasons Egyptian life moves slowly through time. Knowledge is not constantly replaced. It is repeated. Refined gently. Passed forward carefully. A farmer walking toward his fields does not feel like he is stepping into a new world. He is stepping into a familiar one. The same river lies beside him. The same fields stretch ahead. The same irrigation channels guide water across the land. The same tools rest in his hands. Even the sounds are familiar. Sand beneath sandals. Wind moving through reeds. Distant calls across the valley. Each step is part of a cycle that feels older than memory. In the fields, work begins again. Soil is checked. Water channels are cleared. Animals are guided into place. Seeds are prepared for planting or fields are tended depending on the season. Every action follows knowledge shaped by long experience. A farmer does not need to experiment often. The land itself has already taught what works. Too much water weakens crops. Too little leaves them dry. Timing matters more than invention. Observation matters more than change. And observation takes time. It takes years of watching the same land under the same sun. So knowledge becomes something inherited. Not just learned. Inherited like a tool, like a home, like a way of thinking. Along the river, fishermen prepare their nets. They know where the fish move at different times of year. They know how currents shift when the water rises or falls. They know which quiet stretches of the Nile bring the best catch. Their knowledge is not written. It is lived. And because it is lived, it stays consistent. Nearby, boats move slowly along the water. They are guided by wind and current rather than speed. Goods are transported between communities that depend on one another in quiet balance. Nothing feels rushed. The river itself encourages patience. It moves forward, but always at the same steady pace. By mid-morning, sunlight grows stronger again. The valley brightens fully. Shadows shorten. Heat begins its familiar rise. Work continues, but with awareness of the coming afternoon. People pace themselves without needing instruction. This shared understanding is part of daily life. Everyone knows the shape of the day. Everyone knows when effort must slow and when it can return. In workshops, craftsmen continue shaping materials that will be used across the community. Wood is smoothed. Stone is shaped. Clay is formed into vessels. Each object carries purpose. Each object carries tradition. A pot is not only a pot. It is a continuation of a method passed through many hands. A chair is not only a chair. It is the result of knowledge repeated and trusted. Craft does not change quickly because it does not need to. The tools work. The results are known. And in a world where survival depends on reliability, known results are valuable. In administrative spaces, scribes work in quiet concentration. Ink is prepared. Papyrus is smoothed. Signs are carefully written. Records are updated. The work is slow, precise, and repetitive. But it holds the structure of society together. Without these records, grain could be miscounted. Labor could be misplaced. Resources could be lost. Order depends on memory written down. And written memory depends on consistency. So scribes preserve forms that have been used for long periods of time. Not because they are afraid of change, but because change in writing requires agreement across many parts of society. Language, symbols, and structure must remain shared. Otherwise communication breaks. And when communication breaks, stability weakens. As afternoon arrives, heat settles again over the land. The air becomes still. Movement slows. People rest in shade or near water where possible. This pause is not empty. It is part of the rhythm. Work, rest, work again. A cycle shaped by climate as much as by tradition. Even rest becomes structured. It has its place in the day. Its purpose. Its familiarity. And this familiarity extends through every part of life. Families gather in shaded courtyards. Some repair tools quietly. Others prepare for the evening meal. Children rest or play in slower, quieter ways. Elders sit and observe the passing day. Conversation is soft and unhurried. Time feels less like a line and more like a circle. Evening eventually arrives with relief. The heat loosens its grip on the valley. The air becomes lighter. Work ends for the day. People return from fields, workshops, and riverbanks. The movement of return fills the paths once again. Cooking fires appear across the settlement. Smoke rises into the fading light. Bread is baked. Simple meals are shared. Fish, grain, vegetables, whatever the land provides at that moment. Food brings people together at the end of each day. It does not need variety to feel meaningful. It only needs to be shared. After meals, conversation continues gently. Stories are told. Not always stories of kings or great events. Often stories of ordinary life. A good harvest. A difficult season. A neighbor's kindness. A journey along the river. These stories carry memory forward. They remind people of what has been lived before. And what has been learned. Memory shared in this way becomes part of the community's foundation. Not written in stone. But spoken. Remembered. Reinforced. As night returns, the village slowly quiets again. Lamps glow softly inside homes. The sound of voices fades. The stars reappear above the valley. The Nile continues its steady movement through darkness. And once again, ancient Egypt rests within a rhythm that feels almost timeless. A rhythm built from repetition. From environment. From shared experience. From generations who lived, worked, and passed their knowledge forward without needing to change everything around them. The river flows. The desert remains still. And the night continues its gentle hold over the land, carrying forward the same quiet patterns that shaped Egyptian life for thousands of years. The night rests again over the Nile Valley. It does not arrive loudly. It simply returns, as it always does, with a quiet certainty that seems older than memory itself. The river continues its slow movement through darkness. The desert beyond the fields remains still, holding its silence without effort. And within this calm, Egyptian life settles into another cycle of rest. Most homes are dark now. Only a few small lamps remain, their light soft and unsteady behind clay walls. Inside, families sleep in close spaces, sharing warmth as the night air drifts through small openings. The sounds of the day have disappeared. No footsteps on the roads. No tools in the workshops. No voices in the fields. Only the faint presence of wind and water remains. This silence is not empty. It is part of the rhythm. A pause between days that has repeated for as long as anyone can remember. And because it repeats so often, it feels natural. Expected. Safe. As the first hint of dawn approaches, the sky begins to shift once again. The stars fade slowly, one by one, as if stepping backward into distance. A pale glow spreads along the horizon, touching the river first before reaching the land. Birds begin to stir among reeds and trees. A new morning forms gently, without disruption. Inside the villages, life begins again in the same familiar order. A door opens. A mat is folded. A small fire is lit. Water is poured into simple bowls. Bread is prepared for another day of work. Nothing about this moment feels new. And yet it is always beginning. This quiet repetition is one of the most defining parts of Egyptian life. Not dramatic change. Not sudden transformation. But the steady return of the same structure of living. A structure that holds people together through time. Outside, the village slowly becomes active. Smoke rises in thin lines from cooking fires. The smell of baked bread spreads into the cool morning air. People move with calm purpose. There is no rush. There is no confusion. Everyone understands what must be done. This shared understanding is built from years of repetition. From observing others. From living the same routines every day. A child growing up here does not need constant instruction about life. Life teaches itself through pattern. Morning labor. Afternoon heat. Evening return. Night rest. The cycle repeats so often that it becomes part of thought itself. A farmer stepping into the fields at sunrise feels this rhythm immediately. The land is familiar under his feet. The irrigation channels are already known. The tools feel natural in his hands. Even the direction of walking paths feels remembered. Fields are not separate from life. They are part of it. Each season leaves traces of the one before. Each harvest prepares the next planting. And so the land becomes a kind of living memory. It holds the past in its soil. Along the river, fishermen prepare their nets once again. The Nile moves beside them, steady and patient. Its surface reflects early light in soft patterns that shift with every small ripple. Fishermen know this water deeply. They understand its moods, even if those moods change only slightly. They know where fish gather when currents slow. They know where to cast nets when the season changes. They know which quiet bends of the river bring the most reliable catch. This knowledge is not written. It is carried. From experience. From observation. From time spent watching the same water day after day. Nearby, small boats begin their journeys. Some carry goods between villages. Some carry people traveling for work or family. Some carry materials needed in distant settlements. The river connects everything. But it does so gently. It does not demand speed. It allows movement to unfold at its own pace. By mid-morning, sunlight strengthens across the valley. The fields brighten. The river gleams more sharply. Shadows become short and precise. Work increases steadily as people move deeper into their tasks. Farmers tend crops. Laborers repair irrigation channels. Craftsmen prepare materials in shaded workshops. Each action fits into a larger pattern that has been repeated for generations. Even effort itself has rhythm here. There is a way to work in the morning. A way to pause at midday. A way to return in the evening. Nothing feels improvised. Everything feels practiced. In workshops, craftsmen continue shaping the materials of daily life. Stone is cut with careful precision. Wood is smoothed into useful forms. Clay is shaped into vessels that will carry water, grain, and food. Every object carries intention. Every object carries familiarity. A vessel made today will resemble one made years ago. Not because creativity is absent, but because usefulness is already understood. A shape that works does not need to change quickly. And when a shape continues to work, it becomes tradition. Apprentices learn these forms slowly. They watch masters work. They repeat movements. They correct mistakes. They repeat again. Mastery takes time. Sometimes years. Sometimes longer. And during that time, the craft becomes part of identity. Not just skill, but belonging. In administrative spaces, scribes work in quiet concentration. The sound of reed pens moving across papyrus is soft but constant. Records are created with care. Information is preserved with precision. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is casual. Writing is a responsibility. It connects present life to earlier generations. And because it connects to the past, it naturally respects what has already been established. Forms of writing remain stable. Structures remain recognizable. Even small changes occur slowly, carefully, and with shared agreement. This stability in writing reflects stability in society itself. As the sun reaches higher, heat begins to press down on the valley once again. The air grows heavier. Movement becomes slower. People adjust without needing to think about it. Work pauses where possible. Shade becomes important. Water is shared. The environment sets the rhythm, and life follows it. This pattern has repeated for so long that it feels natural. Almost invisible. As if it has always been this way. Afternoon arrives with stillness. The brightest hours feel quiet. Even sound seems softened by heat. The river continues moving, but even it appears calm under the strong sun. People rest where they can. Some sit beneath trees. Some stay near walls that provide shade. Some remain indoors until the heat begins to ease. This pause is not interruption. It is part of the day's structure. And structure brings comfort. Because structure reduces uncertainty. As afternoon slowly weakens, a change begins to appear in the light. The sun lowers. Shadows stretch across fields once again. The valley slowly comes back to movement. Farmers gather tools. Craftsmen close workshops. Boats turn back toward docks. The movement of return begins. This is one of the most familiar transitions in Egyptian life. Outward in the morning. Return in the evening. Work and home. Effort and rest. Distance and reunion. Evening brings a gentle softening to everything it touches. The air becomes cooler. Colors become warmer. Sounds become quieter. Families gather again within homes and courtyards. Cooking fires appear across the settlement. Bread is baked once more. Simple meals are shared again. The repetition of food, like the repetition of labor, creates continuity. Meals are not just nourishment. They are shared experience. A reminder that life continues in familiar ways. After eating, people remain together for a time. Some repair tools. Some prepare materials for the next day. Some simply sit and speak softly. Stories move through conversation. Not always stories of great importance. Often stories of ordinary life. A season that went well. A journey along the river. A neighbor who helped in a difficult moment. These small stories carry the weight of memory. They preserve community identity. They remind people of what has been lived before. And what continues to matter. As night begins to return, lamps are lit across homes. Their light is small but steady. It moves gently across walls made of earth and straw. Outside, darkness gathers again over the valley. The river reflects scattered points of light from the sky. The desert rests beyond the fields, unchanged in its silence. And once more, the world settles into stillness. Not as an ending, but as a pause in a cycle that never truly stops. The Nile continues its slow passage through the night. The stars continue their steady movement overhead. And Egyptian life, shaped by repetition and memory, continues to move forward in the same quiet rhythm that has guided it for generations, carrying the past gently into every new day without needing to leave it behind. The night feels even quieter now. Not because the world has changed, but because the mind begins to settle deeper into it. The sounds of ancient Egypt are few at this hour. Only the river remains in motion, and even its movement feels gentle, almost like breathing. Across the valley, villages lie still beneath the dark sky. Homes are dark except for a few fading lamps. Families sleep in close spaces, resting after another day that followed the same familiar rhythm as the days before it. Outside, the air cools slightly as it moves over the river and through the reeds. The desert beyond the fields stays silent, holding its vast emptiness without movement or sound. Time here does not feel broken into sharp edges. It feels continuous, like water flowing without interruption. And that sense of continuity is one of the quiet forces that shaped Egyptian society for so long. When morning comes again, it does not arrive suddenly. It returns slowly. A soft light touches the horizon first, then spreads across the sky in gentle layers. The Nile reflects that light before the land does, as if it is always the first to notice the beginning of a new day. Birds begin to move again among the reeds. The village stirs. Life resumes. A door opens. A fire is lit. A simple meal is prepared. These moments repeat not because they are forced, but because they are known. Every household understands the shape of the morning. Every family moves within the same rhythm. This shared rhythm is not written in law. It is written in habit, in memory, in repetition passed from one generation to the next. A farmer stepping outside his home at dawn sees the same landscape his parents once saw. The same river, the same fields, the same narrow paths between homes and water channels. Even when details shift slowly over time, the overall world remains familiar. That familiarity shapes how people think about change. When the environment feels stable, large transformation is not expected. Instead, life is adjusted in small steps. A better tool here. A repaired channel there. A slightly different method learned through experience. But always within the same structure. The structure itself remains. As the morning brightens, movement spreads through the valley. Farmers walk toward their fields. Some carry wooden tools worn smooth by years of use. Others lead animals along dusty paths. The fields they approach are not new to them. They are part of family history. Land passed down. Worked repeatedly. Understood deeply. Every channel, every patch of soil, every variation in moisture is known through experience. A farmer does not need to question the land each day. He reads it the way one reads a familiar face. Along the river, fishermen prepare again. They adjust nets with practiced hands. They look across the water with quiet attention. The Nile remains their guide. It does not speak, but it teaches through consistency. Where fish gather. Where currents shift. Where still water holds life. This knowledge accumulates slowly. It is not written in books. It is carried in memory and repetition. And because it is carried this way, it changes only gradually over time. Nearby, boats begin to move once more. They carry grain, clay, stone, and people between settlements. The river functions as a long, living road. One that connects villages without breaking their independence. Movement along it is steady rather than urgent. Even trade follows the rhythm of the water. By mid-morning, sunlight strengthens again. The valley becomes bright and open. The river shines in long, shifting lines of reflection. Fields stretch wide beneath the sky. Work increases across the landscape. Yet even in activity, there is order. Farmers tend crops in patterns shaped by long experience. Workers maintain irrigation systems that have existed for generations. Craftsmen continue shaping materials with methods that have proven reliable over time. Nothing feels random. Everything feels structured. In workshops, the rhythm of labor is steady. Wood is shaped. Stone is carved. Clay is molded. Thread is woven. Each motion repeats what has been done countless times before. An apprentice learns by watching. By copying. By correcting small mistakes. Over and over again. There is patience in this process. And patience is one of the quiet foundations of Egyptian life. Because nothing essential needs to be rushed. Skills are not expected to appear quickly. They are expected to develop fully. Slowly. Carefully. Over time. In administrative spaces, scribes continue their quiet work. The sound of writing is soft but constant. Ink meets papyrus. Records are made. Information is preserved. The structure of society depends on this written memory. But even written memory follows tradition. Forms remain recognizable. Styles remain stable. The written language carries the weight of earlier generations. A young scribe learns not only how to write, but how to preserve continuity. How to remain consistent with what came before. As the sun reaches higher, the heat begins to press once again over the valley. The air grows still. Movement slows. People adjust their pace naturally. Not through instruction, but through experience. Rest becomes part of the rhythm. Shade becomes part of the routine. Water becomes part of the shared understanding of survival. This adaptation to the environment is not a single decision made long ago. It is a continuous process, repeated daily until it becomes part of life itself. Afternoon arrives quietly. The brightest hours feel heavy. Sound softens. Movement becomes minimal. Even the river appears calmer under the strong light. Life does not stop. It simply narrows. Focuses. Waits. This waiting is not empty. It is part of the structure that keeps the day balanced. And balance, once achieved, is often preserved rather than changed. As the sun begins to lower, the valley shifts again. Light softens. Shadows lengthen. The air begins to cool. Movement slowly returns. Farmers gather tools and begin walking home. Boats turn back toward settlements. Workshops close their doors. The flow of people reverses direction, like water returning to its source. Evening brings release. The pressure of heat fades. The weight of the day begins to lift. Families reunite in courtyards and homes. Cooking fires appear again across the village. The smell of bread and warm food fills the air. Meals are shared in familiar ways. Simple foods. Simple routines. But shared together. This sharing is important. Not because it changes society, but because it holds it together. After meals, people remain close. Some repair tools. Some prepare for the next day. Some speak quietly with neighbors or family members. Stories move through conversation. Stories of work. Stories of seasons. Stories of small events that shape daily life. These stories are not grand histories. They are lived memory. And lived memory is one of the strongest forces that preserves continuity. As night returns, lamps are lit again. Their light is soft and steady. Villages fade into darkness. The sky fills with stars once more. The river continues its movement beneath them. The desert rests in silence beyond the fields. And ancient Egypt settles again into its familiar night. A world shaped not by sudden change, but by repeated experience. By cycles of labor and rest. By generations learning the same rhythms of life. By a civilization that moves forward slowly, almost gently, carried by the steady current of the Nile and the quiet persistence of human routine that continues without interruption, day after day, night after night, across centuries that feel, in their daily shape, almost the same. The night feels deeper now, as if the world has settled even further into itself. The Nile moves through it quietly, carrying the reflection of stars that have watched over this land for longer than any memory can hold. Along its banks, everything is still. The villages are dark. The fields are at rest. The roads are empty. Only the soft breath of wind moves through the reeds, brushing against the water in slow, passing moments. Ancient Egypt, at this hour, feels like a place suspended between days. Not ending. Not beginning. Just continuing. Inside small homes, families sleep in familiar closeness. There is comfort in the enclosed spaces they know so well. Walls of mud brick hold the warmth of the day even as night cools the air outside. Simple roofs shelter generations of quiet rest. Nothing about these homes suggests urgency. They are not built for change. They are built for endurance. And that same sense of endurance extends through every part of life here. As dawn approaches again, it does so with patience. Light does not arrive suddenly. It unfolds. First a faint change at the edge of the sky. Then a soft glow over the river. Then a gradual spreading of color across the land. The Nile always seems to notice first. Its surface brightens before the fields do. Before the villages do. Before the people do. And when the light reaches them, it does not interrupt sleep. It gently invites waking. A door opens. A fire is rekindled. A hand reaches for bread. Another day begins in the same way it has begun for so long. There is a quiet trust in this repetition. People do not wake wondering what the day will be. They already know its shape. Work will come. Heat will rise. Rest will follow. And then night will return again. This predictable rhythm shapes not only the body, but the mind. A farmer stepping into the morning already understands the order of his world. The river is present. The fields are waiting. The tools are familiar. The tasks are known. There is no need to search for something new each day when life already provides a steady path forward. And so, movement begins across the valley. People walk toward their responsibilities with calm familiarity. The paths they follow have been walked countless times before. Dust rises gently beneath their steps. The air is still cool, but it will not stay that way for long. Along the river, fishermen prepare again in the early light. They adjust nets with hands that know the work without needing to think. The water is familiar to them in a way that feels almost personal. They read its surface the way others read written words. Small changes in movement. Subtle shifts in current. Quiet signs that guide where effort should be placed. Their knowledge is not fixed in a single moment. It grows slowly over time. Each season adds to it. Each year deepens it. But it rarely breaks from tradition. Because tradition has already proven itself reliable. Further inland, farmers enter fields that carry the memory of many harvests. The soil has been worked by generations. The irrigation channels follow paths shaped long ago. Even the boundaries between plots feel permanent, as if they have always been there. And in many ways, for those living here, they have. This continuity of land and labor creates a deep sense of stability. Not dramatic stability, but quiet stability. The kind that does not call attention to itself because it is always present. Work continues under the growing sun. The valley becomes brighter. Colors sharpen. Shadows shorten. Tasks are carried out with steady effort. Water is moved through channels. Crops are tended. Animals are guided. Everything follows a rhythm that feels natural because it has been repeated so often. By mid-morning, workshops are fully active. The sound of labor fills small pockets of the settlement. Stone is shaped with careful strikes. Wood is measured and smoothed. Clay is turned into vessels that will serve households across the region. Each object carries the imprint of tradition. Not because innovation is absent, but because usefulness has already defined the shape of things. A pot must hold water. A tool must function reliably. A structure must endure heat and time. These needs do not change quickly. And so the solutions to them do not change quickly either. Inside administrative spaces, scribes continue their quiet work. Their reed pens move across surfaces with practiced precision. They record what must be recorded. They preserve what must be preserved. Their writing connects present life to earlier generations in a continuous line. The past is not distant here. It is present in documents, in language, in systems that have endured. And because it is present, it continues to guide the present. As the sun rises higher, the heat returns once again to the valley. The air becomes heavy. Movement slows. People adjust their pace without hesitation. Rest is not a break from life. It is part of life's structure. The midday pause is expected. It is understood. It is shared across the entire society. And because it is shared, it becomes another form of unity. Afternoon settles gently over the land. The brightest hours feel still. Even the river seems to move with greater calm beneath the strong sun. Work does not stop entirely, but it softens. People wait for the shift in light that signals change. And when that change comes, it is felt immediately. The sun lowers. The air cools. Shadows lengthen across fields and streets. Life begins to move again. Farmers gather tools and walk home. Boats turn back along the river. Craftsmen close their workshops. The direction of movement reverses, flowing back toward villages like water returning to its source. Evening brings relief. The heat releases its hold. The land becomes softer in color and sound. Cooking fires appear again. Smoke rises gently into the sky. The smell of bread spreads through homes and courtyards. Meals are shared. Not elaborate. Not varied in dramatic ways. But familiar. Comforting. Rooted in what the land provides. After eating, people remain together in small groups. They repair, prepare, and speak quietly. The day's labor is discussed. Small events are remembered. Stories are shared once again. These stories do not always aim to teach history. But they carry it. They carry the memory of seasons, of work, of lives lived in continuity. They reinforce belonging. They reinforce identity. And they reinforce the understanding that life here is part of something larger and ongoing. As night returns for the final time in this cycle, lamps are lit softly across the valley. Their glow is small but steady. Villages fade into shadow. The sky fills with stars. The river continues its endless path through darkness. The desert remains still beyond the fields. And once more, Egypt rests within its familiar rhythm. A rhythm built not on sudden transformation, but on repetition so deep and consistent that it becomes the foundation of civilization itself. The river flows. The people work. The seasons return. And through all of it, life continues gently forward, almost without interruption, across the long and quiet passage of time. The night settles once again over the Nile Valley, as if it has always belonged there and always will. There is no beginning to it, no ending, only a return that feels soft and natural. The river continues moving through the darkness, carrying the reflection of stars that have watched over countless generations without changing their quiet positions. Along the banks, the world rests. Fields lie still after a long day of labor. Workshops are closed, their tools left where they were last used. Paths that were busy only hours before are now empty and calm. Everything has slowed into silence. Inside the small homes of mud and straw, families sleep in familiar closeness. The heat of the day remains faintly trapped within the walls, slowly releasing into the cooler air outside. Sleeping mats are arranged simply. Bodies rest without urgency. There is no need to think about tomorrow in this moment. Tomorrow is already understood. It will arrive as it always has. With light. With work. With heat. With return. And so sleep comes easily to many in this world. Not because life is easy, but because it is known. And what is known often feels safer than what is unknown. As dawn begins its slow return, it arrives in stages that feel almost unchanging. First, a pale glow appears over the horizon. Then a soft shift in color spreads across the sky. Then the river begins to reflect that light before anything else awakens. Birds move again among the reeds. A faint breeze travels across the water. The village begins to stir. A door opens. A small fire is lit. Water is poured. Bread is prepared. The beginning of the day is not a surprise. It is a continuation. A gentle reopening of something that never fully stopped. This is how life moves in ancient Egypt. Not in sharp turns, but in slow circles. A repetition so steady that it becomes part of thought itself. A farmer waking before sunrise does not question the shape of the day. He already knows it. The fields will need attention. The water channels will need care. The sun will rise higher and bring heat. Work will continue until it becomes difficult. Then there will be rest. And later, return home. This pattern does not change often, because it does not need to. It has already been shaped by generations who learned what works and passed it forward carefully. Outside, the village becomes active in its familiar way. Smoke rises from cooking fires in thin, steady lines. The smell of bread drifts through the early air. Footsteps move along dusty paths worn down by years of use. People greet one another with quiet recognition. There is no need for explanation. Everyone understands the rhythm they are part of. A child growing up here learns this rhythm without instruction. Not through formal teaching alone, but through observation. Through repetition. Through living inside the same cycle every day. Morning tasks. Afternoon rest. Evening return. Night sleep. The structure becomes part of memory before it becomes thought. And so, as children grow into adulthood, they carry this structure forward without needing to redefine it. The land itself reinforces this continuity. The Nile does not rush. It does not change direction suddenly. It flows in a steady course through the valley, bringing life in predictable cycles. Its floods arrive in seasons that are known. Its waters nourish fields in ways that have been understood for centuries. Farmers depend on this rhythm. Communities organize around it. Life itself is built upon it. Along the river, fishermen once again prepare their nets in the early light. Their movements are practiced, almost quiet. They do not need to reconsider each step. Their knowledge is carried in their hands. In their memory. In their experience of years spent watching the water. The river teaches slowly. And those who learn from it tend to move slowly as well. Nearby, boats begin to drift along the water. Some carry grain from harvest stored carefully in granaries. Some carry stone shaped for building projects. Some carry people moving between settlements that share the same river system. The Nile connects them all. But it does not force change upon them. It simply allows movement within a familiar structure. By mid-morning, the valley is fully awake. The sun climbs higher. Light spreads across fields and water. Shadows become shorter and sharper. Work continues with steady focus. Farmers tend crops in patterns that have been repeated for generations. They know when to water, when to wait, when to harvest. This knowledge is not written in formal instruction. It is written in practice. In observation. In time. Craftsmen in workshops continue their labor. Stone is shaped with careful precision. Wood is smoothed into useful forms. Clay is molded into vessels that will serve daily life. Every object carries purpose, and every purpose is already known. Because usefulness has already defined its shape. Because tradition has already tested its form. In administrative spaces, scribes continue their quiet work. Ink moves across papyrus in steady lines. Records are made. Information is preserved. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is careless. The written word is treated as a continuation of order itself. It connects present life to past structure. It ensures that what has been established does not disappear. And so writing, too, becomes part of continuity. As the sun rises higher, heat begins to press across the valley once again. The air grows heavy. Movement slows. People adjust their pace naturally, without instruction. Rest during the hottest hours is not optional. It is expected. It is built into the rhythm of the day. The land itself demands it. And so society adapts, not through sudden decisions, but through long acceptance of what works. Afternoon arrives in stillness. The brightest hours feel almost unmoving. Even sound seems softened by heat. Work continues only where necessary. Most activity waits for change in light. And when that change finally comes, it is felt immediately across the valley. The sun lowers. Shadows stretch. Air cools. Life begins to move again. Farmers gather tools and walk home along familiar paths. Boats return along the river. Workshops close their doors. The movement of the day turns back toward its origin. Evening brings relief. The pressure of heat fades. Colors soften. The world feels gentler again. Cooking fires appear across villages. Smoke rises into the cooling sky. Bread is baked once more. Simple meals are shared in courtyards and homes. Food is not only nourishment. It is connection. It is repetition made visible. After eating, people remain together. Some repair tools. Some prepare materials for the next day. Some sit quietly in conversation. Stories pass between them. Stories of work, of seasons, of small events that give shape to daily life. These stories are not written history, but they are lived memory. And lived memory is one of the strongest forces that holds a society steady across time. As night returns, lamps are lit once again. Their light is soft, steady, and small. Villages fade into darkness. The sky fills with stars. The river continues its slow passage through the night. The desert rests beyond the fields in silent stillness. And ancient Egypt settles once more into its familiar rhythm. A rhythm shaped by repetition, by environment, by shared experience, and by generations who learned that life does not need to change quickly in order to endure. The Nile flows. The people continue their work. And the world moves forward gently, almost imperceptibly, through time that feels less like a series of events and more like a single, continuous breath stretching across centuries. The night settles again, as it always does, without resistance and without sound. It arrives like something remembered rather than something new. Over the Nile Valley, darkness spreads gently across fields, homes, and water, covering everything in a familiar calm. The river continues its movement through it all. Slow. Steady. Uninterrupted. Along its banks, the world rests once more. Villages are quiet now, their narrow streets empty. Workshops are still, their tools untouched. Fields lie in darkness, waiting for morning light. Only the soft presence of wind remains, moving lightly through reeds and tall grasses near the river. Inside small mud-brick homes, families sleep closely together. The day has ended, and the body remembers its fatigue. There is comfort in this repetition. Comfort in knowing that the same cycle will return again when dawn comes. Sleep does not feel like escape here. It feels like part of the rhythm of life itself. As the first hint of dawn begins to appear, it does so gently. The sky changes slowly, as if it is taking its time to remember color again. A faint gray becomes soft gold. The river reflects this change first, catching light before the land fully awakens. Birds begin to stir in the reeds. A few distant calls echo across the water. The village begins to wake. A door opens. A fire is lit. Water is drawn. Bread is prepared. These actions do not signal surprise. They signal continuation. Another turn of a cycle that has repeated for generations beyond count. A farmer stepping outside his home already understands the shape of the day. It is not uncertain to him. It is familiar. The fields will require attention. The irrigation channels will need care. The sun will rise higher and bring heat. Work will continue until the air grows heavy. Then there will be rest. And later, return again to home. This structure of life is not written in rules. It is written in experience. It is passed from parent to child through observation and repetition, not through instruction alone. A child learns not by being told what life is, but by watching it unfold every day in the same pattern. Morning movement. Afternoon stillness. Evening return. Night rest. This rhythm becomes so deeply familiar that it no longer feels like something learned. It feels like something natural. Outside, the village begins its slow morning activity. Smoke rises in thin streams from cooking fires. The smell of bread spreads through the air, warm and steady. Footsteps move along dusty paths that have been shaped by countless previous steps. People greet one another in quiet voices. There is no need for explanation. Everyone already understands what this moment means. Life is beginning again. And it will follow the same structure it followed yesterday. And the day before that. And the day before that. This repetition is not seen as limitation. It is seen as stability. In a world where survival depends on predictable outcomes, stability is deeply valued. The Nile itself reinforces this understanding. Its annual flood arrives in cycles that people learn to expect. Its waters nourish fields in ways that remain reliable across generations. Its presence makes life possible, and its consistency makes life organized. Farmers depend on it completely. Communities are built around it. Even time itself is measured by its patterns. Along the river, fishermen prepare once again in the early light. Their movements are quiet and practiced. They know where the fish gather. They know how the currents behave. They know how the seasons shift the river's character. This knowledge is not separate from life. It is life. It is carried in memory, not in written instruction. And because it is carried in memory, it is passed slowly, carefully, and faithfully from one generation to the next. Nearby, boats begin to move across the water. Some carry goods between villages. Some carry travelers moving for work or family. Some carry materials needed for building and repair. The river becomes a pathway for connection. But it does not disrupt the structure of society. It flows through it gently, without forcing transformation. By mid-morning, the valley is fully awake. Sunlight spreads across fields and water. Shadows grow shorter. The air becomes warmer. Work increases in steady rhythm. Farmers tend crops in fields that have been shaped by long use. They understand the land deeply. Not through theory, but through lived experience. They know which parts of the soil hold water longer. Which areas dry more quickly. Which channels require attention during different seasons. This knowledge is not new. It has been refined slowly over generations. Craftsmen in workshops continue their steady labor. Stone is shaped. Wood is smoothed. Clay is formed into vessels that will serve daily needs. Each object is part of a long tradition of making. Each object reflects methods that have proven reliable over time. A shape that works well does not change quickly. Because it does not need to. In administrative spaces, scribes continue their careful writing. Ink moves across papyrus in steady lines. Records are created with patience and precision. The written word holds the structure of society together. It preserves agreements. It records resources. It maintains order across time and distance. And it connects present life to earlier generations through continuous documentation. Because of this, writing becomes more than communication. It becomes memory. As the sun climbs higher, heat settles across the valley once again. The air becomes still and heavy. Movement slows. People adjust their pace naturally, as they have always done. Rest during the hottest hours is not a choice made in isolation. It is a shared understanding passed through time. The environment itself teaches this rhythm. Afternoon arrives in quiet stillness. The brightest hours feel almost suspended. Even sound seems softened under the weight of heat. Work continues only where necessary. Most activity waits for change in light. And when that change comes, it is immediate and familiar. The sun lowers. The valley cools. Shadows stretch across fields and paths. Life begins to move again. Farmers gather tools and return home. Boats drift back along the river. Workshops close for the day. The movement of the world turns inward once more. Evening brings relief. The pressure of heat fades. Colors soften. The air becomes gentle again. Cooking fires appear across villages. Smoke rises into the darkening sky. Bread is baked once more. Simple meals are shared within homes and courtyards. Food remains consistent across generations. Not because variety is impossible, but because familiarity carries comfort. And comfort is important in a life shaped by steady labor. After meals, people remain together. Some repair tools. Some prepare for the next day. Some sit quietly and speak in low voices. Stories are shared again. Stories of work. Stories of weather. Stories of neighbors. Stories of ordinary life that connect people to one another. These stories are not written history, but they preserve history in another form. They carry memory forward through speech rather than stone. As night returns once more, lamps are lit softly across the valley. Their light is small but steady. Villages fade into darkness. The sky fills with stars. The river continues its movement through the night. The desert remains silent beyond the fields. And ancient Egypt rests again within its timeless rhythm. A rhythm built from repetition, environment, and shared human experience. A rhythm that moves forward not through sudden change, but through continuous cycles of living, working, resting, and returning. The Nile flows. The people continue their daily patterns. And the long story of Egyptian society continues quietly onward, carried not by interruption, but by the steady persistence of life itself, unfolding again and again beneath the same ancient sky. The night feels especially still now. Not because anything has changed, but because everything has finally settled into its deepest quiet. Over the Nile Valley, darkness rests gently across the land, the way it has done for so many ages that no single moment can fully hold them all. The river continues its slow movement, but even it feels softer now, like a final breath stretching across the earth. Along its banks, villages are asleep. Fields lie undisturbed. Workshops are silent. The roads are empty. And for a brief moment, everything feels held in place, as if the world itself is resting too. Inside the homes of mud brick and straw, families sleep close together. There is no urgency here. No rush toward anything new. Only the familiar comfort of bodies resting after lives spent in steady, repeating work. The warmth of the day still lingers faintly in the walls. Outside, the air is cool and gentle. And time, for a moment, feels almost suspended. As dawn eventually returns, it does so without announcement. The sky changes slowly. Light spreads across the horizon. The river reflects it first, as it always has. Birds stir. Smoke will rise again. Footsteps will return to paths worn smooth by countless days. And life, as it has always done, will begin again. Morning. Work. Heat. Rest. Evening. Night. This pattern has shaped everything here. Not through force, but through repetition. Through generations who learned the same rhythms and carried them forward quietly, without needing to change what already worked. Farmers will return to fields that remember their touch. Fishermen will move along waters that never stop teaching. Craftsmen will shape materials in ways passed down through hands they will never meet. Scribes will write words that hold memory in steady lines. And families will gather again at the end of the day, sharing bread, stories, and silence beneath the same sky. Nothing in this world ever truly felt rushed. Even change, when it came, moved slowly enough to become part of continuity rather than interruption. The Nile itself carries this feeling. It does not hurry. It does not break. It simply flows. And in its flow, it holds the shape of a civilization that endured not because it transformed constantly, but because it learned how to remain. As the final moments of night stretch across the valley, the stars above seem to hold their position just a little longer. The desert remains still. The river continues. And the ancient land rests in a quiet that feels almost endless. There is no conclusion here that feels sharp or final. Only a gentle fading, like light leaving the sky at the end of a long day. Ancient Egypt does not end in a moment. It dissolves slowly into time. Carried forward by its own rhythms. By its own patience. By the steady repetition of ordinary lives lived again and again along the banks of the Nile. And as everything grows softer and quieter, the last feeling that remains is not of change or loss, but of continuity. A world that moved gently through time. A world that learned to endure by staying close to its own familiar rhythm. A world that now rests, as it always has, beneath the same vast and silent sky. And then, only silence remains.